Okay, guys, I think we can start. People will be joining along the way, so hopefully we'll see more people joining. In the meantime, first of all, let me welcome you very warmly to the webinar on how to extend the lifetime of a software application. And my name is Karol Kocjan. I'm calling you from Gdańsk in Poland. So good to see you. It's 4 p.m. over here. So this will be the second of our series of webinars. So before we move on to the webinar itself, let me just double check if you can see the presentation and hear as well. So if you do, well, we've already checked with one of the participants who joined early that you do, but please give us a indication whether you can hear us in the chat window. If in the meantime you have any questions, please write these questions into the chat window. But in the end, there will be some time left for discussion. Last but not least, the presentation is being recorded. So if you don't have any objections, feel free to stay over here. If you don't feel comfortable about this presentation being recorded, then unfortunately, I have to ask you to leave the webinar right now. But if you're fine with the recording, then I'll be delighted to see you stay in the webinar. So extending the lifetime of a software application, I hope, well, the subject of this topic is not revolutionary. So I'm not going to turn your world upside down, but I assume that's the reason why you've joined is you would like to listen about this and see what is the perspective of a person who's got over 14 years of experience in IT. So let's kick off. So first of all, this webinar is being organized by Aspire Systems Poland. Aspire Systems Poland is a part of Aspire Systems globally, and Aspire Systems globally is a software engineering company with over 4,200 experts on board. We basically, in a nutshell, do custom software development, and we did a lot of projects which contributed to the experience we have in making sure that our customers' products are like red wine. So the age isn't harming them at all, vice versa. If you want to know a bit more about Aspire Systems, please visit www.aspiresys.com. As for myself, I work as a consulting manager and sales enablement person in Aspire Systems in Poland since 2021. My previous experience is related to business analysis and product management in similar companies. So companies which are project-based companies working as software engineering partners for huge customers around the world. And in several projects, I was one of the members of teams who did software maintenance. And I played a role of a business analyst in these teams. And the main objective of these projects was to take care of some more mature products. So this is why this topic is very close to my experience and very close to what I've witnessed over the past 14 years. Now, before going deeper, please try to think what made you actually visit this webinar. Do you have any specific systems in mind that you would like to keep earning for you. So if you have a story to share, please feel free to post your answers in the chat window. I'll be happy to read them. We can have a quick discussion about this after the webinar. So do go ahead and share your motivation with us. In the meantime, let me go through the agenda for the webinar. So first of all, I would like to explain the term of product sustenance. So this is the approach that is actively followed and implemented by Aspire Systems. Then think of it also in terms of triggers and what should actually trigger you to think about implementing product sustenance measures. Then what are the best practices in planning and executing your product sustenance strategy? In other words, what steps can you take in order to execute your plan to extend the lifetime of your product? Then we will speak about measuring how effective is your product sustenance model. So in turn, if this is the formal agenda, but the structure I would like this meeting to have is
Karol, jesteś umutowany.
right. Okay. Did you? Okay. What was the last thing that you've heard? Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me just repeat the last thing. So basically, speaking about the agenda, I would like you to think about this webinar in terms of defining the goals of your product sustenance strategy, selecting the methods that you want to use in your product sustenance strategy, as well as measuring how efficient is your product sustenance model. So think about the structure of this webinar in these three categories. So I'll try to highlight the moments in which I shift from one specific item to the next point in this structure that I would like this webinar to have. Okay. So first of all, let's think about what is product sustenance. So as you can imagine, product sustenance is not any different than red wine, as it is pictured over here. So product sustenance means activities which are aiming to extend the lifetime of products while improving revenue and customer retention. The pace of technology reduces time to markets drastically for new products, and it shortens the lifetime of and the life cycle of mature products. So this is an ongoing challenge in the third decade of 2020s. I think a great example of that is Nokia as a company. They openly admit that at some point they neglected their product sustenance strategy, and they did oversleep the rise of a smartphone, what made them fall out of the market, and what caused them to stop being one of the leading retailers of mobile phones globally. And they lost to Apple, they lost to Samsung and other smartphone providers. Product sustenance may also mean managing and supporting those mature products while still generating revenue and keeping the customers happy. And mostly product sustenance means fighting with three key challenges. So first one is customer churn. So making sure that your customers are still with you, making sure that they don't go away, they don't look away to find what they need within the competition products. The second one is increasing the TCO, the total cost of ownership, and improving the margins. So whenever you reduce the cost or keep the total costs under control, the margins are, of course, positively affected. And the third one is decreasing revenue. So mature products have a tendency to earn less revenue for the producer of the product. Now, so having defined what product sustenance is, let's try to see when should you think about product sustenance as a set of activities that you need to implement. So think also of it as a list of pain points that might become ultimately the goals of your strategy, because the goals will be based on removing certain pain points from your organization, from the roadmap of your product, from your product's lifecycle plans. So the first one is the growing product cost. So if you can see that the cost of maintaining your product is growing higher, and the costs are skyrocketing in double digits every single year, this is one of the first items that will tell you that you probably need to think of a product sustenance strategy, something that will help you to keep those costs under control. You can think of it as having an old PC, still with Windows 98, for instance, perhaps even floppy disks, right? First of all, the challenge is that it's really hard to get the parts for that old machine. And this is obviously one of the reasons why the costs are growing higher. It's really hard to find people who will be able to replace these parts, people who will be able to use Windows 98 in order to configure your equipment. And last but not least, you will have to spend really a lot more time on supervision needed to predict what potentially may cause the next problem. I also like to use the comparison with old cars. So this comparison here works also perfectly well. So all these problems are also applicable to driving a 20-year-old car. So the parts are expensive, and people are not willing to fix it for you. And you need to, before every journey, you have to look into the engine to see if the engine is not having any leakages in the meantime. Okay, so the second one is a sharp decline in revenue. So we had cost rising, now we had the revenue falling. And if you see that the revenue starts declining sharply, and that this means that probably people stop buying your product because they can find what they need elsewhere, right? So I think a great example of this is a Walkman. Of course, right now in 2020s, it's a lost cause. So only people who like, let's call them vintage products, use Walkmans. But yeah, but I think this was, of course, inevitable due to rise of technology. But this is a great example of an invention which is no longer applicable in the modern world. Vinyl records, in the meantime, are actually a story of a great comeback, right? So back in the 60s and 70s, they were state of the art, but they didn't die completely because from standard means of playing music, they were actually converted into collector's items. So, which means that the strategy was successful. Of course, it was not centrally managed, the strategy for vinyl records, but as a product, you can think of it as a good example of a successful comeback. Now, the next one is freeing up resources for higher priority projects. So if you can see that your best people cannot be used for something really cool, for something that you would like to develop in the future, to something to be the next big thing in your industry, this means that you also need a product sustenance strategy, because you want to free up your best engineers, you want to free up your best specialists to work on these products. And this use case is a very common case for companies like ours, since we are very happy to support you and take some of the burden on our own shoulders. Then increasing customer loyalty. So the picture with the map here was placed by no accident. So I do think everybody associates this kind of picture with social media. So increasing customer loyalty might be really associated with the revenue itself. Nevertheless, revenue sometimes can be independent from keeping a huge customer base. Since for some companies, just like social media companies, keeping a high customer base is an asset on its own, because their business is actually perceived to be successful if they've got a huge customer base. So I think the best example is Twitter. So a company which has been for a very long time been in the red, and that company was not generating profits. Nevertheless, the market shares, the stock of Twitter was very highly valued, mostly because of the fact that they had a very huge base of users. And customer loyalty on its own can be a goal if you also have midterm plans to launch something very, very huge, and having a lot of people in your group of customers, in your group of users, may give it a very quick rocket start. Okay, last but not least, minimizing the technical support costs by reducing complexity. How many times you've had this so-called spaghetti problem? I put the picture of cables here by no accident. When you were trying to fix something at home and you didn't know which cable to unplug, so that first of all you turn off the electricity for the right device. At the same time, you don't disconnect something that should not be disconnected by all means, because that needs to run constantly, continuously, right? So this basically means that your things at home are too complicated. So comparing that to products, systems developed over in the past, long time in the past, they grow the number of modules, connectors, lines of codes, interfaces as well. And understanding them suddenly becomes a huge challenge. And it gets really tougher year by year to train your stuff and to diagnose the right problem once it occurs. Fixing the problem creates a huge risk of regression effects, right? So this is also another reason why unplugging the wrong cable might be very risky. So these 5 items were the key arguments why product sustenance as a strategy should be implemented. And what you can do as a part of your product sustenance strategy, this is the topic of the next group of slides. So select and implement methods. So you can see these 5 categories I was speaking of in the couple of previous slides. And you can see from 1 to 3 dots. 1 means that basically it has the lowest impact to this particular category and won't be the silver bullet in achieving that particular goal. And 3 dots means that this is what you're looking for if your goal is to improve your efficiency in that particular area. So first one is support ticket management and maintenance support. So I guess you've had at least once in your life a situation where you had to, when you had 2 comparable products, one of them was slightly cheaper, the quality was comparable, if not the same, but you knew that one of them, namely the one that is slightly more expensive, has better support, right? The producer provides better post sale support. And I guess it was an obvious choice then for you, unless you were really in a dire financial situation. But if you weren't, I guess that was a very huge argument that if things go wrong, you will be able to receive support. So if you create a formal support ticket management and maintenance support process, perhaps following the ITIL methods, right? That are the golden standard these days. This will enable you to react faster, better manage which of your resources are involved in product support, release management, and improving your support process. And your product will be perceived as more stable and reliable. So this will help you to improve the customer loyalty. It will also help you to manage what is going to be worked on and what not. That's why I gave it 3 dots for cost efficiency. Moreover, if you formalize your support process, you will gain better knowledge in terms of what are your customers actually looking at, which parts of the application are actually used. So if people raise problems, this means that they really use it, right? One of my former bosses actually was always saying that if you want to know who's using that part of the application, try to turn it off for 2 days and see who complains. And that is an additional value in creating a formal support process. Feature enhancements, bread and butter for us as IT. So this one is not going to be cheap. So this will not improve your costs drastically, and it will not free up your resources, but it will help you to drive your revenue up and improve customer loyalty. And well, if you want, you can use certain feature prioritization methods like the Kano model. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about the Kano model. Basically, it says it's one of the few models of prioritizing requirements which involves psychological factors. So this basically means that in each product release, you should have at least one basic feature, at least one performance feature, and one delighter. Basic feature is something that the customers will never notice because this is just they're just taking it for granted that it exists. Performance feature means that this is something that the customers are expecting, and they treat it as something that the product should be having as part of its development. And delighters is something that they don't expect, something that they will be very surprised to see, and as the name says, they will be delighted to see it. So feature enhancements is a way of keeping your customers happy mainly, not controlling the costs. Customization and segmentation. So customization for different price groups, markets, geographies, locations. So this actually will increase how close your customers feel to your product. So for instance, if you release your product in a local language, which hasn't been supported before and your competition hasn't done it, this will certainly attract new groups of customers for you. And this will give the psychological feeling of closeness to your customers. Or same with introducing some special accessibility measures if we're talking about accessibility requirements. So making sure that people who have certain disabilities will be able to use your product without any hindrances. Just the warning here. So this may increase your support costs, right? Because you will have more versions of the product to maintain. But again, on the revenue side, this might be very beneficial. Modularization is very similar, actually. So here we're talking about splitting your product into smaller pieces and releasing and having a sales strategy which enables your customers to buy just part of the product, just what they need, just the things that they will be using, and paying less for it, so being more cost efficient. So they do have a modular, scalable platform, and it will help to make your product become more accessible, the threshold which has to be surpassed in order to start using the product. So the financial threshold. So in other words, the initial price that the customer will have to pay in order to start using your product will be lower. And this will be a good incentive to enter the product. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard about an IKEA piece of furniture called Billy. It's a bookcase. I have one at home. And this is a perfect example of modularization, because IKEA decided that, I guess that might be obvious for some of you, but instead of selling the whole thing, it will be selling just modular pieces that can be put together in many different ways, right? So it can be customized to different tastes. It can fit different spaces. So you've got two examples over here. It's the same, actually, same piece, Billy, in one flat, and then Billy available in the other flat. I mean, like you can see that the modules differ from each other, but these are all parts of the same set. Then migration. So this one is more technical. So technological migration. So as an example, migration to the cloud or migration to some newer front-end framework. So here, if you're not very techy, we recommend you consult your product sustenance partner to find out what are the feasible options corresponding to your main challenges. And I intentionally put the word progressive in brackets because it's optional, but this is the way things are done. This is usually done in very careful steps, especially the cloud migration. And this will help to minimize your support, and it will free up your resources. Most likely it will drive your costs down. But it was really hard to find one common denominator between the benefits that you can gain from it, because every case is different. As an example, one of my favorite companies, and I'm not doing product placement over here, is I just simply like them. It's 2015, so the Spotify's leadership and engineering team agreed that that in-house data centers were an obstacle for them to achieve their goal of being the best music service in the world. So they decided that they want to free up the Spotify's best engineers to focus on innovation. So they started the planning for migration to Google Cloud Platform, so GCP. So in other words, instead of fighting with scalability, with enhancing the data centers, they started the cloud migration to achieve scalability quicker, better. And Spotify actually, it took 2 years for Spotify to from the decision to the actual execution of migration. So ultimately, the Spotify's on-premise to cloud migration was successful and succeeded in granting us scalability, and the developers were able to focus on some better and more fancy features. I'm sure you've noticed that recently Spotify actually introduced lyrics on the screen for selected songs. So my kids actually love it, and I guess it wasn't very fancy from the perspective of visual effects, but making sure that you have got so many songs and you're able to follow the lyrics on the screen. I think that might have took some time in order to took some time to implement. Okay, test automation. So this is a typical cost side measure. So this will help you to achieve cost efficiency, and it will help you to free up your testing resources to do some better, more exploratory and more thorough testing instead of testing basic use cases. It will probably help you to minimize your support. Then, having said that, just do remember that testing automation isn't the remedy for everything, and it's not something that you can rely on 100%. So we always say to our customers that a good testing strategy always involves both automated testing and manual testing. So please remember about this, but test automation is the future if you've got standard use cases that you want to test every time you make changes to a piece of software. Release management and process improvement. So what I mean here is everything that makes your product manufacturing process more effective, more cost efficient, and more time to market. And I think the most prominent example in the history of the world is the Kanban system introduced by Toyota some time ago. And it's a scheduling system developed in Japan. And basically this helped Toyota to be manage Toyota as a brand to be perceived as a high quality brand. But it also happened without, let's say, driving the prices of the cars to a next level. Of course, I will not deny that Toyota had trouble with some of its parts. As far as I remember, it was the clutch. They had a lot of problems. They were actually pulling back a lot of cars from the market, but Kanban as such is generally perceived as a very huge success story. Now, so these were well, that I believe that was 6 items or 7 items that you could do in order to improve and extend the lifetime of your application, of your system, of your product. Now, what you shouldn't forget about, you need to define your goals, right? You need to define your goals. And when I'm speaking about goals, I mean the things that I presented in the first set of slides. So what was the driver for you to migrate, to think of your product sustenance strategy? And once you define your goals, you select the measures that you want to implement, and then you measure the progress. And do remember that you need to have metrics to measure your product sustenance activities. So first of all, the first metric should be, of course, customer satisfaction, whichever way you measure it, right? So this is a must-have. Whatever will be your strategy, whether it's cost-driven or revenue-driven, customer satisfaction is something that shouldn't be compromised. Then percentage of reduction of maintenance tasks. So take into account that some of the maintenance tasks are bigger, some of them are smaller. So make sure that your measure is taking that into account. Next one, product revenue. In the end, in capitalism, we are all working to generate revenue, right, for the company in this or the other way. So this is, of course, a very valuable metric. Then total cost of ownership, making sure that your product is not costly to maintain and taking the cost as a whole. Of course, if your total cost of ownership is increasing, but your product revenue at the same time is increasing twice as much as your TCO, then nothing wrong's happening. But if your TCO is increasing, but the product revenue stays the same, or even worse, declines, then this might be a worrying sign. And one thing that you can also consider is some metric. We need to construct this metric on your own. So do some definition, then do some semantic work first. Rate of unlocking of experienced resources. So how much of your staff is actually working on legacy products, and how big is the part of your experienced, most talented staff, which is used for perspective or prospective products, prospective projects. So once you've constructed those measures, start measuring, select the best ones from them, and go ahead and measure how successful you are. This is the end of today's webinar. Thank you very much